The event unfolded over 40 years ago, but its significance is still felt. Its magic is still remembered.
It was so grand, and we were so impossibly young.
Magic, it's magic, you know, that things mean something.
It was a complete fairy tale. A night that I'll never forget as long as I live.
It was a night when French and American luminaries of fashion came together and saw their worlds change forever.
Kings and queens went to it, and they wore crowns, and they had crown jewels and scepters and things. I mean, it was crazy.
We were just thrilled like kids that we're going to Paris.
It was a surprise to see us there. What are they doing here?
The Americans were invading Paris.
Looking back, it was a turning point, a moment that influenced culture, art, and so many lives.
Everything was changing in 1973.
A lot of the old rules had been discarded. It was possible to experiment.
People wanted to be challenged, wanted to be surprised.
Is it a competition or a game? We thought we were dominant.
Nobody was thinking this was going to change the fashion world. As we look back on it, we see it as a turning point.
The distance between the continents closed.
It happened so fast. It left you speechless.
The future of the fashion industry opened one evening in Versailles. There is no preparing for the spontaneous, and so there are only a few scraps of film and a handful of photographs from that November evening in 1973. But vivid still are the memories of those fortunate enough to have been there, who relish the chance to recall and relive it. At 70, Eleanor Lambert was a publicist without peer in the American fashion world. She dreamed about this night for 40 years. It would be the crowning achievement of a career shaping taste and style.
Fashion, it's history in fabric. It frames the time you live and the place you live, and the mood of people.
She was sort of the grandmother, the mother of the industry. And I think she was more like the Anna Wintour of then.
She was the most powerful person in the industry, unrivaled for decades. She knew many world leaders. She knew every president and first lady back to Eleanor Roosevelt. Jackie Kennedy came to Miss Lambert because Miss Lambert had helped Mrs. Eisenhower.
She created Fashion Week, the Coty Awards, Fashion's Oscars, and the International Best Dressed list.
The Best Dressed list was something that people were insane about. The Queen of England was angry that she was on the same list as the Duchess of Windsor.
John Tiffany and James LaForce were both mentored by Eleanor Lambert. Each served as her assistant.
She represents that Midwestern work ethic.
She was a very hard worker. She worked every single day. But Eleanor Lambert was not about making herself famous.
Born and raised in Crawfordsville, Indiana, Lambert took the values of the heartland and found a new pasture to cultivate them in New York City.
It's very Midwestern to not call attention to yourself. She knew that her place was behind the scenes, fixing things.
Humble though she was, Lambert was formidable as a point person, with the influence to control the narrative about American fashion in boardrooms and in the press.
She could yell as fiercely as a man, and she could flirt and giggle and tell a story like a great mistress.
In the 1930s, Mussolini called Eleanor Lambert a bitch. She said, well, at the time, I was so upset, and it was in Time magazine. She goes, but now I consider it a badge of honor.
But she was an A-lister who found herself one evening in casual conversation with Gerald Vanderkemp, the curator at the Palace of Versailles. The former royal residence built during the reign of Louis XIV, Versailles was the center of French government until 1789. Nearly 200 years later, the vast, opulent chateau was in dire need of repair, for which Vanderkemp sought funding. Lambert offered a simple fundraising solution, a dinner and fashion show for high society, featuring 5 French and 5 American designers.
It was her driving idea for 40 years to raise the visibility of American fashion to that of the French.
The French group would include Hubert de Givenchy, Pierre Cardin, and Yves Saint Laurent. And for the Americans, Oscar de la Renta, Halston, Anne Klein, Bill Blass, and Stephen Burrows.
The French dictated fashion to the world. The French couldn't care less, Americans, nobody even thought 1 minute that there was any talent in America.
Paris was it in the world. They were the only ones that it was assumed they knew or could do fashion and set the trend.
In the 60s, American fashion was considered the apprentice to the Parisian master. Working in the back rooms of department stores, the Americans were more disciples than designers, sent each year to copy the French. But then came the 70s, the post-revolution decade, with changes on all cultural fronts, including fashion. And now, American designers, with the help of Eleanor Lambert, began to develop their own styles under their own names.
I think what she understood was that American culture had changed.
I do think there was a sense that the era had ended as a kind of bad trip. Things seemed to be up for grabs. It's the year of the end of the Vietnam War.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook.
Richard Nixon's White House is becoming engulfed in the Watergate scandal.
Well, I'm not a crook.
The 70s became an era in which the gay rights movement really sort of emerged. The women's rights movement also became tremendously vibrant. At the same time, you see black figures are appearing on television, in movies. There's a new visibility.
There was a space for this community of people to represent beauty. And it was Black is beautiful.
It was a period of great freedom. People were not afraid to be different.
Marissa Berenson was dubbed the It Girl of the 70s, an accomplished actress and model at just 24. She was also the granddaughter of famous Italian designer Schiaparelli.
People were coming out of a more restricted look in fashion, and all of a sudden there was a sort of sexual freedom, artistic freedom.
It was so innovative and so creative and so fresh.
And New York City was at the heart of it.
Creativity in New York was at an all-time high. I don't know if it'll ever be like that again.
I think New York moves in cycles. It's usually 10 years ahead of the rest of the country.
New York is a place where Europeans could say, oh, New York is dead. Nothing's going on there. And then it's another time where, oh, New York is happening.
Model Nancy North fled the Connecticut suburbs for a more exciting lifestyle in New York City.
New York in the 70s was in deep decline. Did we care? No, we didn't care. It was very gritty, but we didn't see it that way.
And everybody mixed together, the art world, the fashion world, the social world.
I met him on a street corner. Oh, there's Andy Warhol. We were doing the cover with me with the American flag in my mouth. He said, "You want to be in the movies?" And I said, "Sure." Beats being a bored housewife.
Fashion and music was so caught up with each other in those days. And it was the new music, the house music. It was a much more innocent time. I like to say before the snowstorm hit Manhattan.
Cocaine hadn't swept the city yet. Pot and LSD were the drugs of choice. And Studio 54 wouldn't open for another 4 years. But the seeds of disco had been planted.
I went out with the boys mostly. That's where the music was the best, in the gay clubs.
You walked up the smelly, smelly hall. It's awful. But once you got past that smell, when the doors opened, the sound was so powerful. The pulsating beat, the music, the sound, that 8 beat, that 8 count.
Oh, you'd go in there and you'd start dancing.
And you dance and you dance and you dance. You couldn't sit down.
Show up at 11 o'clock and dance until dawn.
And you'd come out, it would be the next morning. You just danced all night.
Calvin was starting, Donna Karan was starting. There was a whole group of young designers. We all went together to Fire Island.
The Pines or the Grove on the weekend, the whole artist community. It was all about love the one you're with. Didn't matter if it was a girl or a boy. It just, if you all liked each other, you liked each other, and that was it.
42 American models were invited to Paris to compete at Versailles. The pay for a week's work was poor, just $300. And so, some of the top American models, like superstar Lauren Hutton, turned down the offer.
Going to Paris, Versailles, I was like thrilled, I was excited.
I didn't get paid, but who cared?
I would have gone for free. I'd never been to Paris before.
Billy Blair dreamed fashion while growing up in Flint, Michigan. She modeled in Detroit, got a break to go to New York City at age 27, and never looked back. She was one of 10 black models to travel with the American team to Paris.
Everyone who had a big heart and actually wanted to go to Paris to have fun, the black girls, the white girls, became part of this group.
I was a bit of a Francophile. From a kid, I wanted to learn French.
Alva Chin grew up in Old World New England, educated in the classics at Girls' Latin School in Boston.
I've always felt that Paris was my home.
When they got off the plane, they kissed the ground. They were so happy. They were trying to speak French.
Stephen Burrows is the only American designer from the Versailles show still alive to tell the tale. Growing up in Newark, New Jersey and Harlem, he always had a creative bent, but eventually, his love of art gave way to a passion for design.
Thought of the clothes as toys and that they should be colorful. My father was always sketching. I was on his lap in the bars, and he did caricatures of everyone in the nightclub. I was going to become an art teacher when I left high school. I ended up switching schools from Philadelphia to FIT in New York and trying my hand at design.
He brought colors. He brought all the black girls, and that was his palette, you know, color against dark.
Pat Cleveland was discovered on a subway ride and modeled in Paris for a few years before becoming a muse to both Halston and Stephen Burrows.
The girls that he chose, he knew them well and they loved him.
One of those girls was Brooklyn-raised Beth Ann Hardison, who got her start in the garment district, working at a button factory. A longtime assistant to Burroughs, Hardison complimented Stephen's easygoing style with her street-tough savvy.
To be a part of Stephen Burroughs' world was special because you learned so much about his work ethic. He would do things that no one had ever done before. To lettuce anything, to take the fabric and stretch it to a point that it makes a ripple. No one had ever done that.
Stephen Burroughs was not Eleanor Lambert's client, but she saw how hot he'd become in the fashion world. He was in and of that moment in time, fresh off a Coty Award in '73, making his presence felt and his sense of style matter.
Stephen was the street. Stephen was fun.
Observing people on the street, homeless people that just put anything on. That was a great inspiration for me. When you sit down to sketch, everything you experience ends up coming out.
The fact that Stephen Burroughs was included in Anne Klein is what made it American.
The other American designers were all Eleanor Lambert clients. Established, accomplished, renowned, but only in the United States.
We made classics fashionable.
None of the French designers wanted Anne Klein at the event because she was sportswear.
She's the one who they didn't want anyway. They took her because she was right on time with where contemporary women were.
A native of Brooklyn, she started as a sketcher and founded her own label in 1968.
She, like Liz Claiborne, figured out that there's so many women that are working and they need clothing that works day and evening.
She knew that women need power.
Feminine, yet appropriate for work.
It was more typical of what was being sold in those stores than those other guys.
Anne Klein's idea of how the world should dress is what the whole world does now.
Born in the Dominican Republic in 1932, Oscar de la Renta moved to Europe at the age of 18. He apprenticed in Paris under superstar designers Balenciaga and Castillo before his career took off in the United States in the 1960s.
He's one of my favorite. He really loved women and the way they moved and the beauty. He was very romantic.
Oscar's one of the most charming men you would ever have met. Honest, warm, funny.
The kind of clothes he was making were really for aristocratic or very wealthy women.
Oscar knew how to make a woman look pretty.
Oscar's stuff always looked like it was for movie stars.
From Indiana came Bill Blass. He began sewing and making evening gowns at age 15. And after 11 years working at Maurice Rompner in New York City, he bought out that label in 1970 and went to the moon.
Very good-looking man, absolutely charming, but it was always a kind of a pose, with the cigarette sort of hanging off his lip.
By 1973, China Machado was an editor at Harper's Bazaar, but she became famous in the 50s as Richard Avedon's muse.
People who buy my clothes feel that they are of value, and they feel comfortable and happy in them.
He created himself as a character, kind of like Cary Grant did.
Carla Lamont started knocking on doors in Paris and found work immediately as a model. Bill Blass was enamored with her European sophistication. He gave her so much work that she became identified with the Blass look.
You know who you want to be like, and so you live up to that.
How much will that cost? Have you priced it yet? Yeah. No, I didn't price this yet.
Bill was just exquisite tailoring.
Bill Blass, total glamour.
The music, the girls, let's go.
Blanche knew who his clients were. They were American. They were women with money, and he really catered to that woman.
They loved him. He was so generous and designed clothes they could wear and look glamorous, and they loved it.
Halston's stature exceeded that of the other American designers in 1973, and he knew it.
Very cool. Always, I'm in control.
He owned the 70s.
He had a natural elegance, Halston, within himself.
A grand ego. Yeah, it was never a bad ego. It's good to be king, and he played it well.
I know very few good creative designers who are modest. It's not part of the game. They obviously must be sure to be creative so that their assistants are very convinced of it too.
He had the fabrics, the fit, and the forward thinking, the modern thinking of keeping it clean.
Dennis Christopher, an aspiring actor, was 6 years away from a starring role in the Oscar award-winning movie Breaking Away. But in 1973, he was Halston's assistant.
He stripped everything away from American fashion. He was the future.
He turned down Lambert's invitation at first, but the thought of his designs on display in Versailles and the international publicity it could bring caused him to reconsider.
The American woman is pretty smart as far as herself and her fashion is concerned, and I don't for one moment think that we're going to dictate fashion to them.
Born in Iowa, Roy Halston Frauwick made a permanent name for himself when he designed a pillbox hat for Jackie Kennedy.
He was really reproducing Givenchy clothes, licensed to Bergdorf Goodman. Miss Lambert really encouraged him to be himself. He did these completely creative and truly American things.
Halston was a genius in marketing. He had Vogue editors, he had Society, the celebrities, all knocking on his door.
She became one of Halston's entourage due to her hard work and striking looks. But Chris Royer's first love was design.
He became Halston, the great American designer.
And it was new, it was modern, it was very simple silhouettes, no zippers, just completely streamlined, sleek.
Simple, easy to wear. They weren't as stiff as the other clothes that were around.
His stature, reputation, and bankroll grew, and only months before Versailles, he sold his company and name to Norton Simon for $16 million.
He cut things the way no one else cut. There's no one else. He's never been replaced.
So now I'll take you through the archives of Versailles.
There's Halston, there's Andy Warhol, there's me.
The hopes for American success in their presentation rested on another Halston recruit, Liza Minnelli, fresh off her Oscar win for Cabaret.
This is a photograph of backstage at Versailles where all the drama took place. Tensions were pretty high, especially with some of the designers, especially Halston. He was known to have some temper tantrums sometimes.
Upon arriving, the Americans immediately rehearsed, or rather tried to rehearse their presentation, but the conditions were deplorable. It was cold, there was no food, no toilet paper.
The Americans rehearsed late at night, where the French rehearsed during the day.
In 1973, she was not yet the queen of 7th Avenue. Donna Karan was 25, pregnant, and working behind the scenes as an assistant to Anne Klein.
And it was freezing in Versailles. To get a cup of tea, we would just, anything to hold us. We was all bundled up in warm coats.
Versailles truly needed the repairs. The windows were in disrepair. Everything in there needed a serious upgrade.
This theater that you couldn't open the door without it maybe falling off after it had been abandoned for so many years, Things dragged on.
More importantly, the French team was spending far more time rehearsing than had been planned, adding considerable stress to an already tense situation.
We're sort of separated from them. Oh no, you can't come over here. You're the Americans, stay over there.
And this is Marissa Berenson coming in.
And people were all trying to get, rehearsal time. Conditions were not good.
There was so much chaos.
It was completely chaotic back then. And then there were all the egos.
And everybody wanted to be the star of the show.
The shit was hitting the fan consistently.
A flat-out cat fight.
Holston was really, really high-strung that day.
He realized that we could not rehearse his own segment.
We were left with no time to rehearse.
Holston put his foot down and got really angry.
He was furious.
And the arguments broke out. It was like, okay, children, stop, la, la, la.
Here we are backstage for the event. There's Kay Thompson, and that's Liza Minnelli. They're talking about how distressed they are over the explosion Holston just had.
Hollywood legend Kay Thompson, the choreographer recruited by Halston, was stuck between the designer's egos.
And he said, that's it, we're out, we're not showing, we're not doing the show. I want everybody out. I want all these clothes packed up and on the plane tonight. If it's not, I will come after you. You will have no way to get home. And he left.
Halston went out, he walked off and went to his limo.
Nobody knew what to do. It was just a friggin' nightmare.
I thought, my God, you're fighting back here, you still have to put a show on.
Holston's behavior was really diva-licious, and
Kay couldn't take that, so she left.
She quit, yes, because everybody was screaming at her.
I'm standing next to Liza, we're like, Liza gave a speech that would wake the dead.
And she said, don't worry, girls, we can do anything because you're great.
We got to put on the show. You don't quit a show.
And you just make the best and just assume no one else knows what it should have been or could have been.
Kay Thompson and Halston both cooled down and would reappear a day later at the main event, never mentioning the incident. Hubert de Givenchy, Emmanuel Ungaro, Pierre Cardin, Mark Bowen designing for Christian Dior, and already legendary 37-year-old Yves Saint Laurent. The names alone were intimidating.
The French had some very big heavy hitters. You might have a David and Goliath in there, absolutely.
They were superstars, especially Yves Saint Laurent. He had a very dominant position in the world of fashion, and especially in France.
They were treated like kings in Paris, where fashion is sacred, dating back to 17th century royalty.
Nobody was telling the queen or the empress what she should wear. She decided for the world. So the haute couture, les grands couturiers, were the only ones to have worldwide fame.
Haute couture, hand-stitching of custom-made clothes, was a high art form that set the trends for the rest of the world.
The haute couture is really handwork. You got women sewing away. Every creation was so unique.
The quality, it's all in the cut and in the little details of good quality. I mean, the buttons look right, the hem is perfect. You walk out of your house looking beautiful, and you know that when you'll get somewhere, you'll look the same.
How are you?
Clients came in, and we would model the samples.
The French used to present clothes without any music. You can just scream out a number, 29, 10.
You chose the model you wanted to purchase, and it was made for you.
Of these 8 collections, how many models would you order?
Well, I take about 2 at each place.
2 from each?
Yes.
16?
16.
I'm spoiled.
The girls had numbers, and it was very precise, you know, and there was no fun.
They walk differently than us, with their hips forward and, you know, very rigid.
You have to have the time to look at the dress, see how it's cut. You have to touch it.
18, 18.
You could hear the floorboards squeak as you walked. And you could hear somebody snoring, the husband of the wife.
Numero 304, number 304. A 300-pound dress is what we call our little bread and butter numbers. We'll hope to sell 150 of them. But, I mean, when a woman buys a Rolls-Royce, she isn't going to be the only one to buy a Rolls-Royce. It gives her a status symbol. She sees the other Rolls-Royce. They realize they belong to the same world. They bow, and they pass on.
Ready-to-wear was gaining popularity in the 60s, and haute couture was fading by 1973. It was cost-prohibitive, the culture was changing, and clothing reflected a more casual lifestyle.
In 1973, the major couturiers were already in ready-to-wear.
I very often buy ready-to-wear too, because I think that the style of ready-to-wear, sometimes it's so amusing and gay.
There was a sexual revolution, there were women who were working, there was not people dressing for high tea and dressing for cocktails.
We used to be very interested in what very fashionable women are wearing, like the Duchess of Windsor. All these women have been influenced by the younger ladies in the street who are wearing these sort of what I call kooky clothes.
And so a simple idea, conceived in so complex a time for this grand stage, finally would be realized.
A glittering crowd of the beautiful people of Europe and the United States turned out for the fashion event of the year.
When we want to impress people, we have Versailles. It's the biggest palace in the world, and well, as you know, we are rather arrogant.
Yes, it was a fashion show to raise money for the palace, but the press were less interested in the evening's events than in the jewels and star power highlighted by the arrival of Princess Grace of Monaco.
The evening was studded with the best of the best.
Overwhelmingly glamorous. I had never seen anything like that. All the diamonds and jewelry and tiaras and ball gowns.
You know, you just saw those women with their hair and their chignons and their beehives and the pearls and the feathers coming out, you know.
You saw all the royalty, Princess Grace, and the Rothschilds, you saw everyone there.
They're just like anybody else who wants to see a big movie star who's just won an Academy Award. And they don't want to be closed off in a gilded cage.
It was a very glamorous evening. The clothes were beautiful, the girls were beautiful, the theater is extraordinary. So the whole thing was like this magical moment in time, actually.
As the event progressed, the night transformed. An air of competition overtook the palace as the audience began to assess the respective shows and designs. Fashion, like all art, is subjective, and the French presentation left a wide range of impressions.
The French were very chic, and they had these wonderful sets.
Something extraordinarily dressy and beautiful.
The French had an orchestra, and they had set design. It was so grand, it was operatic.
Very French and very elaborate.
This is something for Versailles. You go for the elegance. Where they lost was the complication of how they presented.
I thought it was kind of strange.
It was awful. It was agony.
A lot of clanking and bunking and things bouncing around.
perhaps a sort of caricature of past elegance.
Just so pretentious.
Over the years, U.S. expatriate and World War II spy Josephine Baker had become a star in France, and she didn't disappoint in her opening number.
Josephine Baker had the beads hanging off her extremely long legs, and her feathers were standing up out of her head. And
she tore off an 80-pound fur and threw it off and was wearing this rhinestone bodysuit.
It's just impossible. She looked absolutely marvelous.
The French looked to their heritage of haute couture rather than to the future and ready-to-wear to make their statement.
The backdrop of the French presentation were these wooden sets, 17th century sets.
It wasn't about necessarily the models or the clothes, it was more about the set.
Watching the French, Bill Blass and Carla Lamont looked at each other and shared the same sentiment.
We were in awe of what we were seeing. Oh my gosh, we're not doing anything like that.
You know, they had Sputniks taking off on stage. They had live rhinoceros carrying a cart, a pumpkin carriage.
Christian Dior had Cinderella's pumpkin.
Danielle Darrieux arriving in a pumpkin carriage as Cinderella in her 50s. Maybe it's a little old to be a Cinderella.
Reindeer and all this sparkly stuff, and it was like old time.
It looked like a real high-class garage sale.
But I remember mine. It was stupid. I was this actor sweeping the floor, you know. More or less, we stood there. It was very static. I think we just did a couple of steps. It's really silly, you know.
French show was 2.5 hours, and it just went on forever.
All the mix of the ideas of a little of one thing, a little of something else, became absolutely ridiculous.
I defy anybody to tell me about any one of the dresses that were in the French segment. They're completely forgettable.
With very little rehearsal time, the Americans prepared backstage for their presentation.
Everybody was so tooled up. You know, we were anxious and excited.
And everybody's pulling your hair, putting makeup on you, putting on your clothes. And then suddenly, okay, they're calling your names. Come on, what am I? You go on, and like, you're so nervous, and you just go, and it's a blur.
I remember being a little nervous. Saint Laurent was in the next box.
One of the French models, Gunilla Lindblad, had a sinking premonition, having watched Liza Minnelli rehearse.
I went in the back, and when I saw the American show, I said, my God, this is ridiculous. The French look like amateurs.
we were backstage, and she didn't want to go out. I said, Liza, you have to step over the rainbow. And suddenly I saw this rainbow of light go across the stage, and she stepped into the spotlight, and it was like, oh my God, we're in Oz.
I wanna step out down the Champs-Élysées, do some window shopping on the Rue de la Paix. That's for me. Bonjour, Paris.
It was like a musical Broadway show.
I had this umbrella, and you had to tap it. And
to triumph to the Pitti Ballet. That's for me.
We had hats that we were supposed to throw up into the air.
The energy, the choreography, the music, that kind of breath of fresh air. And of course, the French loved it.
It was about a show. It wasn't about fashion per se. It was about how you deliver your presentation, and in the end, who was the winner.
It was like that good old American, we're gonna win.
The American performance would be against a stark background. The set designer had built his sets based on inches rather than centimeters, so everything was out of proportion and had to be scrapped.
We had no backdrop, We had a taped cassette. We had no scenery. We were like a block party.
Anne Klein had a secret. She was dying of cancer and had less than a year to live.
I found out she was ill at Versailles. It was, I think, life changed at that very moment.
For 5 days, she had navigated egos behind the scenes for what would be a culminating moment of a life's work.
Anne called me before Versailles. She was doing a collection that she felt was more ethnically inspired, and she needed my help.
On this night, her motif was African, and it was a departure for her.
She had a double thing to prove. I'm a woman, and I'm using African American women.
This was not the sportswear the French expected. Instead, it embodied seduction and grace.
Her stuff came out like liberated women. And it's like, mon Dieu.
When the girls came out, a lot of skin, but they were wild. All the French, they were overwhelmed. They had never seen anything like that in fashion.
This is Stephen Burrows. You can see his clothes are very different than anybody else's. He was a designer who would do a lot of sewing himself. And there's Beth Ann. That's behind the scenes before his presentation. And she came out with fierce conviction.
To say Stephen Burrows' segment surprised the French would be an understatement. His love of art, colors, and music came together in a brisk 10 minutes.
You had a silhouette of us all standing there.
We looked like creatures.
It symbolized 1973. Culture and fashion fused in one creative statement.
When we walked out, we individually had a certain amount of attitude.
They shimmied and shook and everything else. I mean, the French couldn't believe it.
Here we are, and this is new.
And you could hear from the audience, they were like, wow.
They had never seen black girls so beautiful.
What are they doing here? How did they get here?
African American models were really kind of rare, strutting around with such joie de vivre, you know? It was so different.
Oh my God, this is really sexy and beautiful. People wanted to feel this funky beat, and it just cracked the ice.
Then they all came forward, walked to the end of the stage and posed.
And then Beth Ann killed them all.
Fiercely walked down the runway, staring straight at them.
When I add the sum of you and me.
Then I knew how important my dress was to Stephen, because it was such a journey for us.
High society loved the defiance of Hardison, the street fighter from Bed-Stuy.
When I threw my train down, I stood and stayed. I wouldn't move. I was like, if y'all don't feel that, fuck you. I was defying exactly who they were. This was our moment. They really felt it. They just start to stomp. I'll never forget that moment.
French took their program and threw it up in the air.
Oh, everybody was like screaming and clapping and yelling.
And then all of a sudden, there was Oscar standing behind Halston with his hands on his shoulders saying, oh, go, Beth Ann, go.
They threw their programs up in the air and stomping and screaming. I thought something had gone wrong.
Tears came to my eyes. I was shivering. I was trembling like this. My God, I think we did it.
Bill Blass kept the momentum rolling. He relied on the glamour of the jazz era.
Women love the idea of being a sporty American, and he was a sporty American. He had given us walking sticks and binoculars. We watched the racetrack. We went around and watched the whole racetrack.
Blass was a dreamer from the Midwest, like Jay Gatsby. The elegance of this flamboyant time period was a hit with the Cafe Society of New York and Paris. Halston's presentation relied on dramatic lighting and music.
He went crazy with the designs. He was designing fantasy clothes, clothes that didn't have to sell.
I remember dancing in this black sequins dress with black gloves and a mask. Halston sort of created a look for the American woman, a real elegance, but also sensuality.
This is Alva Chen wearing a Halston.
My part in Halston was homage to the Folies Bergère, because I had one breast exposed.
When she got to the edge of the stage, she ripped it apart, she showed her breast. The French went crazy.
And I think it's hysterical because my boob was about as big as a fried egg. Sheena Machado, he had her with a fan in front of her breast.
Halston designed a dress that was only a skirt. And then he gave me a big fan with feathers and nothing. I was topless. And I, what am I supposed to do? I held this fan and he kept saying, move it. I wasn't going to move it for anything in the world.
Halston said to me, I want you to be a moth. I had this image in my head of going to the light and burning.
Pat Cleveland's athleticism was well known to the American fashion community. But it was a revelation to the audience that night.
Pat Cleveland was amazing. She twirled all the way down. And the dress, it was out like a flying saucer all around her, this huge fucking dress. And we thought, she's not gonna be able to stop.
She just kept spinning and spinning and spinning, and she just didn't stop.
You could feel this tension in the room. Is she gonna fall off the stage?
Somebody need to tell her to stop.
She spun all the way down to the end and stopped on a dime.
I was on the edge of the stage.
I knew we were kicking butt. It was so straightforward, so direct. And that to me was shocking because we had never done the whole thing through. In one fell swoop, really through.
Oscar de la Renta fought and politicked to show last. He left Paris in 1963 for an opportunity in America and came back 10 years later with his own successful company. An elegant line of ready-to-wear and something to prove.
This is the Oscar section, and he did everything in silk crepe. It's great to wear, and it's beautiful feeling.
The music that Oscar selected was iconic 70s. Mozart had played here. Why not Barry White? After all, his instrumental Love Theme was #1 on the American R&B charts.
There's Billy Blair as the genie with the scarf, leading everybody into a sort of it was like a snake that went around the stage.
The influence of black models on the evening was complete with Billy Blair's genie routine.
The spotlight was just on that hand. And as the chiffon went up, the light widened.
When Billy came on the runway, you knew it was Billy.
All the beautiful models, you bring them from one side of the stage, then you turn to the other side and bring them in. It's like creating. Oh, it's awesome, it's gorgeous, look at them. And they were coming alive, it was awesome.
It was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was fast, there were no set designs, the music was loud, all these things was a positive.
And this is the finale here. This is Liza here. There's Carl Lamont.
Liza Minnelli brought down the house with her closing number, while each model celebrated and soaked up the final moments.
In the end, when we got to that last piece where we started posing, and I started voguing, every girl started posing. It was a beautiful thing to watch.
People in the audience, I'll never forget, they stood up and were throwing the programs up in the air.
It was like confetti. You saw these golden programs going up in the air.
Liza Minnelli told me when the programs were thrown onto the stage that the first person who stood up was Princess Grace, who was not French, she was an American.
And people stomping their feet and yelling out, "Bravo, bravo."
We knew we nailed it.
And it was glorious because these people were just waiting to get to you.
It's one of those things where the rehearsal's a disaster, but the opening night was great.
For decades, people have been trying to understand what happened that night. How, in a little over a half an hour, the Americans gave a performance that would have brought Marie Antoinette to her feet.
It lasted 37 minutes, and we killed them.
It didn't sneak up, it shocked. It happened so fast. It was bang slap, and it left you speechless.
Sometimes we don't need a lot of things to feel humiliated, especially in Versailles. It was not the first time we were humiliated in Versailles.
This is Liza. The back, that's her back. She's hugging Billy Blair. It's the end of the show. There's Carla Lamont. That's myself. There's Marissa Berenson.
Was it Fanny, Vidi, Vicky? We came and we saw and we conquered, that kind of thing. I think that sense was there.
The competition was not only two countries, but between two continents, a new one and an old continent. And for this precise evening, it was obvious the continent was old.
Their show was the kind that you would bring your grandmother to. Our show was the kind you'd bring your daughter to.
As the Americans basked in the afterglow backstage, Josephine Baker, a 1950s civil rights activist who had refused to perform before segregated audiences in the U.S., made her way back to the crowded dressing room.
This is Stephen Burrows with Josephine Baker. Here's this legend, right? Stephen's thrilled, you can tell.
She ran into me and she said, "You've got to take me backstage. I want to meet the girls." She kept saying how proud she was to be an American.
She just touched my face. She walked up to me and she just touched my face. She looked at me. I know that she was telling me that it's going to be a journey and it might be a little bit difficult, but you're going to make it.
Did the French feel defeated? To the contrary, they were humble in their admiration of the American show.
What was great for me, the greatest thing for me besides my walk, okay. Mrs. Saint Laurent said that Stephen Burrows was the only American designer. And that meant everything to me.
Saint Laurent told me I made beautiful clothes, and that was like the best moment of the trip.
Don't let that be seen on the screen. I'm still tough, don't you ever forget that.
Until that point, only royalty and heads of state were allowed to walk down the Hall of Mirrors. Historically, since forever. We heard that as a thank you that they were opening it to us that night. So I grabbed Ramona Saunders, who had an amazing Stephen Burrows gown on, and then promenaded with this unbelievably beautiful girl down the Hall of Mirrors, regarding ourselves in the Hall of Mirrors before the crowd came in. And when we got to the end of it, there was a little fainting room in the back that Marie Antoinette had for herself that was untouched. And we went down to the little fainting room, and Ramona laid on the thing, and we had a nice time. I think I smoked a joint on Marie Antoinette's fainting couch.
The parquet floors, the rococo, the gold.
Wow. It was so incredible just to be in that space alone.
I was wearing my princess dress, and that thing just twinkled in the candlelight. Everybody kept going, oh, the princesses, the princesses. We looked like these little glass figurines.
It was like a fantasy.
All the French were so anxious to talk to us about these clothes that we did.
Who starts to walk next to me is Monsieur Givenchy. He took my arm and he said to me, "You are magnificent. You Americans stole the show. We're gonna step out on the Champs-Élysées." We got into the dining area and the cherubs were dancing, the candelabras were high, and the Duchess of Windsor said to me, "You have stolen the heart of Paris."
Yves Saint Laurent said in 1968, the term of elegance was to be replaced by the idea of seduction, and that's precisely what the American performance in Versailles showed.
It's always been this funny thing like, well, where was Eleanor Lambert? It's not Miss Lambert walking down the runway. It's not Miss Lambert shaking everyone's hand. She's trying to make the designers seem like the stars. She kept the president of France waiting at the dinner. We can't start until Eleanor Lambert comes, but where is she? She was telexing the press release to the United States to say, like, America had this huge win.
There was an immediate change in the industry. Some of the models found more opportunity.
Personally, it was my introduction to going to work in Europe.
The French designers decided we have to change. We have to get energetic models and get ready to where we're going.
My career trajectory went like that from that day.
And American designers' sales took off abroad.
French women were responding and making orders immediately after that show.
Anne Klein was a huge winner after Versailles, too. I mean, her company completely took off. She didn't live much longer after that, but the Anne Klein company went through the roof.
Let's not forget why we were there. No one was taking charge. No one was saving this incredible building. It was really in ruin, and we helped focus that.
Years later, Oscar de la Renta said that black models had made the difference. The French pointed to the choreography of Kay Thompson and the performance of Liza Minnelli. But the night would not have been possible were it not for Eleanor Lambert. She knew to wait until America was ready. She would live to be 100. But on that one November night in 1973, she saw the right opportunity, seized it, and altered the fashion landscape forever.
It was a snowy night at Versailles. Like, it doesn't really snow in Versailles, but it was November, and it was snowing. And Eleanor Lambert saw that as like some kind of destiny. Afterwards, she said, "The winds have changed, have kicked open the doors of Versailles and ushered in a new era."
The French had owned fashion until that point. America pulled up a chair to the table of fashion and said, "We're here. We're definitely here. And we need to be reckoned with."